And just like that, Jon Jones takes the #1 pound-for-pound spot in the rankings. Volkanovski and Islam have been putting in some work here for the last couple years, just for Jon Jones to come back after 3 years and take that spot from them in 2 minutes of a fight. He's now #1, Volk is #2, Islam's #3, Leon's 4, and Usman is 5. Jones went from #10 to #1 in a single fight where he dominated, ran right through Cyril Gane in a higher weight class. So whether you agree or disagree, he has reclaimed that throne yet again. And Jon Jones has never lost in his career. He's only been beat a couple times for the #1 pound-for-pound spot. One time he was beat by Jose Aldo, beat by Khabib. I believe at one point he was beat by Demetrius Johnson, who honestly right now, if you were to ask me, not just in the UFC, but overall MMA, Demetrius might actually be the #1 pound-for-pound guy in the world, especially considering the fact that he's fighting much bigger fighters right now, and he's beating them. Not just fighting them once or twice either. He's competing against these guys regularly while being like 15 to 20 pounds lighter. But the other times Jon Jones was not #1 was because of his inactivity or the fact he was stripped. But now he is #1. And remember, Leon versus Usman's next week. And both of those guys are in the top 5. Whoever wins that fight, I could see them going into the top 3. Whether they knock down Islam or they knock down both Islam and Volkanovski, I can absolutely see a scenario, whether I agree or disagree, I can absolutely see either Leon or Usman, whoever wins that fight, can knock down Islam and or Volkanovski. I just don't see the rankers putting either of those guys above Jones. And Cejudo's fighting Sterling. If Cejudo beats Sterling, he might be in the top 5. There's a lot that's going to change in the pound-for-pound list. Adesanya's fighting Pereira again. Those guys are number 6 and 7, right outside the top 5. If Pereira beats Adesanya again, he might enter the top 5 as well. Because you have to think that the loser of Leon and Usman is going to drop outside the top 5, which is going to pick up Pereira into it. Or Adesanya if he beats Pereira as well. So there's a lot of change that's probably going to happen here. The pound-for-pound rankings are going to shake up even more in the next couple months, which really shows you that pound-for-pound is really just a promotional tool. It's used at this point to promote fights. Now, I like it. It creates excitement for fights, and most fans really love that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean too much. The original definition of pound-for-pound was supposed to be the fighter, regardless of weight classes, would be the best in the organization, right? Pound-for-pound was created when Sugar Ray Robinson back in the 50s was fighting in boxing, because even though he wasn't a heavyweight and he couldn't beat the heavyweight boxers, he was the best boxer on the planet. That's the main reason they even created this pound-for-pound thing. And honestly, if you go by the original definition, that's where you could see Volkanovski being #1 because of how well-rounded he is. He can wrestle, as shown even against bigger guys like Islam Makahchev, who has dominant grappling. He has a complete technical striking game with respectable power, very fast hands. He's one of the smartest fighters, really doesn't have many holes, doesn't lack in too many departments. He's like that well-rounded version of a lighter fighter that you would really throw up in the top of the pound-for-pound rankings. Volkanovski would be good in literally every division. He could struggle a little bit in the welterweight and bantamweight divisions. Lightweight is tough for pretty much anybody, but everywhere else, he's going to be really hard to handle. But if we go by the original definition, we'll also have to throw in like Robert Whittaker all the way up into at least the top 7, maybe top 5, for the fact that he could shut down most wrestlers' game. He has some of the best far-range karate blitzes in the entire UFC. Very fast, one of the best jabs you've ever seen. That 1-2 high kick combo is so tricky to defend against, and he throws it up at times where the opponent never really expects it. Even some of the best strikers in the whole UFC find that combination pretty difficult to handle. Great overall Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu defense, great wrestling defense. The only thing that really goes against his kind of style in the heavier weight classes, let's say, is the fact that he doesn't have the greatest chin. So I could see like a heavyweight Robert Whittaker could fall victim to some of that power. But for the most part, he's way too technical for a lot of fighters here. Even comparing him to some of the lighter fighters in the lightweight, featherweight, and bantamweight divisions, he could be a huge problem to handle. I argue he could probably be top 5 in every single division, right? He dominates welterweight. He does very well at lightweight, very well in bantamweight, light heavyweight, and I would say that featherweight and heavyweight are his toughest divisions, whereas all the others he can do really well in. Islam Makahchev, of course, one of the best grapplers in the UFC, surprisingly fast with his strikes, has decent power and able to catch you off guard. He has good eyes for counters, has decent cardio, can grapple at a very fast pace, and is relentless with his chain wrestling. Amazing submissions on the ground, and one of the best fighters in actually establishing good positions. Now for Islam Makahchev, I can see him doing very well at heavyweight, beating everyone besides maybe Jon Jones. He dominates light heavyweight, dominates middleweight, runs into a lot of issues at welterweight. Welterweight is his toughest division. Of course, does very well in lightweight, does very well in featherweight, does pretty well in bantamweight, and a menace at flyweight. Petr Yan should be in the top 15 100%. He has some of the best boxing in UFC history, great wrestling overall, solid kicks, some of the best combinations, solid defense overall, has good countering, has good offensive tools, has a lot of power for his weight class. So if you were to speculate like his power would grow the heavier he gets, imagine a guy who can knock you out with one punch, throwing combinations the way Yan does, and being as technical as he is with his boxing. The only thing that really goes against him is that sometimes he makes mistakes where it'll make someone watching like scratch their head, but absolutely would be one of the best pound for pound fighters as well. Petr Yan dominates heavyweight, dominates light heavyweight, runs into a lot of issues in middleweight because of how good those strikers are, runs into issues in welterweight as well because of how good the wrestlers are, but I do see him being a top contender there. Very well in lightweight, does very well at featherweight, of course does well in bantamweight and also flyweight. Max Holloway has some of the best combos, granite chin. Imagine having an iron chin in every single weight class while throwing fast combinations the way he does. He lacks the power, but he's so well-rounded everywhere when we talk about his technique, from his wrestling to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to kickboxing to straight boxing. It's just that power disadvantage is really going to hurt him in the heavier weight classes. Max destroys heavyweight. The only thing is just that power difference. But you could kind of imagine almost being like a better version of Ciryl Gane with actual good takedown defense. He dominates light heavyweight. He does okay in middleweight, not too bad. It's just that when he runs into guys like Adesanya and Pereira and maybe even like Whitaker, those are some tough fights for him. He does pretty well at welterweight. He's probably top 5 at lightweight. One of the best at featherweight, of course. He does pretty well at bantamweight, but there are some matchups there that will give him problems. And probably same thing for flyweight. He's a top contender at flyweight, but there are some guys there that could give him some issues. Dustin Poirier, probably the best boxer in the UFC. Really good reflexes overall. Solid takedown defense. Great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. One of the best finishers in the UFC. Has crazy killer instinct. A good chin, a lot of heart, and overwhelms you with his boxing output, combined with actually respectable power behind it, which is very rare. Dustin is a top contender at heavyweight. He does very well at light heavyweight, runs into issues at middleweight because of how good those strikers are, but he could try to take him to the ground and use some of that there. So I say he's at least a top contender at middleweight. He runs into a lot of issues at welterweight, and that's probably his toughest division. Of course, he's one of the best lightweights. He does well for featherweight, probably not the champion or anything like that, but a top contender. Bantamweight's a competitive one for him. He can win a lot of those, he can lose some of those. That's a tough division for him. And he does well in flyweight, but there are some matchups there that can give him some issues. Brandon Moreno should be up there as well with really good boxing, one of the best jabs in the UFC, good body and head kicks masked up behind his boxing, great trips in the clinch, and amazing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, one of the best scramblers in the UFC, with an absolute iron chin. Does not gas out and keeps himself disciplined no matter what's happening in the fight, no matter how much he's getting hurt or how much success he's having. Moreno's a top contender at heavyweight. He's a top contender at light heavyweight, if not a champion. He does very well in the middleweight division, can trip out a lot of those strikers, take over with that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu advantage, and his striking overall is something that it could be pretty tricky to handle as well. He does very well in the welterweight division, given his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If he gets taken to the ground, he can scramble with a lot of guys over there, and he has superior striking to 99% of that division. So I could see him being at least a top contender, if not a champion there. He does pretty well in the lightweight division. There are some guys that would give him some issues, but I could see him be at least like a top 7, top 5 fighter there. He does amazing in the featherweight division. Pretty good in bantamweight, probably at least top 5. And of course, in his own division, he's the best. And also what's crazy is, where's Colby Covington, right? Colby Covington would have to be at least in the top 15, man. Just talking about his skills alone, I know he's very inactive, and that's the biggest thing going against like Jon Jones, right? A lot of people don't think Jones should be number 1 because he has been so inactive. But Colby's wrestling skill is a problem in every single weight class. And his striking is so hard to handle combined with that wrestling threat. He just doesn't have the kind of power. You know, that's it. He has a good chin. He's pretty fast. He has probably the best cardio we've ever seen. So in the heavyweight division, he would be a dominant force, light heavyweight dominant force as well. Completely dominates the middleweight division outside of Robert Whitaker. And even that Whitaker fight is a close one. He's one of the best welterweights. Lightweight might be his biggest problem, right? Lightweight with some of those submission artists, Dustin's guillotine, Charles Oliveira's overall submissions, Beneil Dariush, Islam Makahchev, like these guys can all submit him. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in that weight class, as well as featherweight, honestly, are like his biggest enemies. So at lightweight, I can see him maybe being top 5, if not top 7. He's a dominant force at bantamweight. Aljamain Sterling might be a bit of an issue for him. And at flyweight, I would say at least top 5. The only issue about ranking pound for pound fighters is that it's very unfair to the heavier weight classes because the lighter weight classes are almost always more technical. There are contenders in like the bantamweight division that if you were to put their skills into heavier fighters that can absolutely be in the top 10 of the pound for pound rankings. Imagine having like a middleweight Peter Yan or a light heavyweight Peter Yan or welterweight, put him in all these different weight classes, how many of them would he at least have success in? Or just outright dominate those divisions? It's kind of unfair because you're not going to see guys in the welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight divisions to be as skilled as guys in bantamweight, featherweight, and lightweight. Whenever you think of pound for pound, we almost always look at the lighter weight classes. Right? Jon Jones is an exception, and he should definitely be really high up there because he's extremely skilled. But when you talk about pound for pound as well, you have to also factor in the power, you have to factor in like strength and all that stuff. And when we look at the lighter weight class guys, we don't see the same kind of power, and we can only speculate that they'll have more power in the higher weight classes, But you have to also speculate they're probably not going to be as skilled, which is why honestly pound for pound could be a rather silly debate. It's all like speculation, We don't actually know how good these fighters would be in other weight classes. So when they go into a higher weight class and perform, that's like the only way we can really tell. And that's why I believe they put Jon Jones at number 1, because we just saw Volkanovski fight Islam in a very competitive fight, but we just saw Jon Jones not only beat, but run right through the best heavyweight in the UFC right now. Now, is Ciryl Gane comparable to Islam Makahchev? In my opinion, he is not. That's why I do hold Volkanovski in such high regard when it comes to pound for pound. But results are ultimately what's going to make up that list, and the majority of what fans actually care about, right? They don't care about if you have a close fight. Most fans are going to care about if you actually won and if you dominate that opponent in that win, which is what Jon Jones did. And there was a lot of hype of Jones' return. The light heavyweight to a heavyweight jump is much bigger in terms of just pure weight. And the heavyweight division has always been looked at as, yes, one of the least skilled divisions, but also one of the most dangerous, right? You make one mistake and you could lose that fight to anybody. So honestly, pound for pound really goes to just what you think it is. If you go by the original definition, I think regardless, you would have to have Volkanovski, Jones, and maybe Makhachev in the top 3. If you go by pure results and accomplishments and all of that, then Jon Jones is 100% number 1. So the pound for pound list got shaken up a bit because of Jon Jones' 9-spot change. He went up 9 spots to number 1, and it's always going to create a debate. Nobody's really going to agree, right? There's a lot of people that don't agree that Jones is number 1. There's a lot of people that disagree that Volkanovski should be number 1. There's still a lot of people who believe that Islam should be number 2 or number 1. In my personal opinion, I'm going by the original definition. I would have Volkanovski as number 1. I would have Jon Jones at number 2. I might have Islam at number 3 or Usman. And I probably have Robert Whittaker at number 5. So it would be Volkanovski, Jones, Islam, Usman, and then Whittaker. But it is quite debatable. I'm not like 100% set on any of these guys. I'm going to have Dustin Poirier right up there. Max Holloway probably close. Oliveira should definitely be closer to the top 5. Aljamain Sterling looks pretty good, but I think Peter Yan would be so much better in different weight classes than Sterling would be, right? In fact, you could even argue that Peter Yan could be in the top 7. Imagine a heavier Peter Yan with those exact skills in higher weight classes. He would be an absolute menace, right? He'd be in the top 3, if not a champion in every division. I think the same thing with Robert Whittaker. I actually think Whittaker's skills are so dominant in almost every single division. It's crazy to see him at number 14. So it's an interesting shakeup in that pound for pound ranking. And leave in the comments below, what do you guys think? Who would you guys pick as number 1? And how would you rank like at least the top 5 if you want to go top 15? I'm really curious to see what you guys think as well, because it's a very subjective list.